Rain pattered softly against the hospital windows, a steady rhythm that filled the early morning silence with a cold kind of comfort. Malik Carter sat hunched in a corner of the waiting room, his broad shoulders pulled tight with exhaustion. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, his worn hoodie looked thinner, his jeans more threadbare. The cracked screen of his phone lit up occasionally with unanswered texts, but he didn't move. His eyes, red-rimmed and fixed on nothing in particular, carried the weight of sleepless nights and mounting fear. Just hours ago, his 6-year-old daughter, Ava, had collapsed during recess. One minute she was running across the blacktop, laughing. The next, she was unconscious in an ambulance, tiny limbs limp and pale. Doctors moved quickly, words like complications, surgery, and insurance limitations spun around Malik's head in dizzying clinical loops. He nodded numbly, his mind focused on one thing, getting her the help she needed outside. The rain fell harder as Malik walked toward the parking garage. The concrete was slick, puddles catching the blurry glow of overhead lights. He stopped. In front of his car, an aging navy blue sedan, rusted at the wheel wells, but still humming with memory. It had belonged to his father, a man of few possessions, but unshakable pride. Malik had learned to drive in that car, taken Ava home from the hospital in it after she was born. He ran a hand along the fender, then opened his phone. With a few clicks, no fanfare, no hesitation, he listed it for sale. The call came faster than he expected. Later that night, under a flickering street lamp, a tow truck rumbled up to the curb. The driver nodded, handed over a folded stack of bills, and hooked the car's bumper. Malik stood silently as the sedan was pulled away, taillights disappearing into the wet dark like a closing chapter. Back inside the hospital, he counted out the cash at the front desk, his hands steady, his face unreadable. No tears, just quiet. Urgency. Hours later, the ICU hummed with machines and hushed footsteps. Malik sat at Ava's bedside, her tiny hand cradled in both of his. Tubes and monitors surrounded her fragile frame, but her chest rose and fell in a slow, even rhythm. His fingers brushed hers gently, as if afraid to wake her. A nurse passed behind him, paused, then knelt beside his chair. Her voice was soft, compassionate. She's going to need more than love to get through this. Malik nodded once, eyes never leaving his daughter's face. He had nothing left to give, but somehow he knew that wouldn't be enough. Malik Carter hadn't planned to be a single father. 3 years ago, he was working as a junior architect at a modest but promising firm in the city, still catching his stride, learning to build dreams on paper while juggling the very real demands of fatherhood. He and Jasmine had their rough patches, but he believed in pushing through, and she simply didn't come home. No note, no warning, just silence. Ava was 3. Malik came home from work to find her sitting alone in the living room, still in her pajamas, a juice box clutched in one hand and a crayon in the other. That day, everything changed. He quit the firm not long after, unable to manage the long hours and constant deadlines with a toddler who clung to him like a life raft. The warehouse job came later, steady, predictable, and just enough to cover rent and food if nothing unexpected happened. He never planned for much more than that. There was no safety net. His mother had passed from cancer when he was 12. His father, a stubborn, soft-spoken man who worked the same assembly line job for 30 years, had done his best raising Malik alone, instilling in him quiet strength and an unshakable sense of duty. That old sedan, now gone, had been the only thing his father left behind. Malik kept it running with second-hand parts and sheer will, more for the memories than the convenience. Selling it wasn't just a financial decision, it was a final goodbye to the only man who'd never let him down. But Malik didn't dwell on it. Dwelling was a luxury he couldn't afford. Their apartment was modest, dim, third-floor unit in a run-down building just outside downtown. The walls were bare, the furniture second-hand, but everything had its place. Malik slept on the living room couch, giving Ava the only bedroom. Her room was a world apart from the rest of the apartment walls, covered in paper stars and drawings of caped heroes and magical creatures, shelves lined with thrift store finds and makeshift dioramas she built from cardboard and glue. He let her dream big, even if he couldn't offer much. Every evening, no matter how tired he was, he read to her. Every weekend, they drew comics together on the kitchen table. Ava had always been a quiet fighter, smart, observant, endlessly curious. She asked the kind of questions that made adults pause. Why is the sky sad when it rains? Why don't you ever buy anything for yourself? Why do people leave? Malik never had good answers, but he did his best to give her consistency, safety, and love. And then came the collapse. No warning, no signs, just a phone call from the school. His heart dropping as he rushed to the ER. The doctors ran tests, used words like congenital heart condition and undiagnosed defect. The diagnosis landed like a punch he hadn't seen coming. Now Ava lay in the ICU, pale against a sea of wires and machines, and Malik stood at the edge of another impossible choice. Dr. Leo Nguyen, the pediatric cardiologist assigned to Ava's case, explained things clearly, but with a heaviness in his voice that told Malik he wasn't sugarcoating anything. The surgery she needs now is just the beginning, Dr. Nguyen had said gently. There'll be more. Medications, follow-ups. You need to prepare yourself. This isn't going to be easy. Malik didn't respond, just nodded with the same quiet focus he used when lifting warehouse pallets, as if brute strength alone could hold back the flood. Nurse Kendra was different, told her calm, with the kind of warmth that didn't demand conversation. She didn't press him to talk. She offered him water, adjusted Ava's blanket, reminded him to eat. And somehow, Malik trusted her. He didn't trust easily anymore. Too many people had left his mother, then Jasmine, friends who disappeared when life got hard. He kept others at arm's length now, even at work. Polite, dependable, but closed off. Ava was the only person he let all the way in. Home. The bills were starting to pile up. Malik had begun pawning tools and small appliances, calculating how much longer he could stretch his next paycheck. The hospital deposit had emptied the emergency savings he'd scraped together over months. Every dollar he spent now felt like watching the floor crumble beneath him in slow motion. But none of it mattered when he was with Ava. He held her hand, through the machines beeping, whispered stories about superheroes who never gave up, who always found a way even when the odds were impossible. Because that's what Ava needed to hear. That's what he needed to believe, even if the world was quietly closing in around him. The morning after the surgery deposit, Malik sat at Ava's bedside, her little fingers curled weakly around his. The worst seemed to have passed for now. She was stable, the monitors no longer screaming in frantic rhythms, and the color had begun to return to her cheeks. But the relief was short-lived. Dr. Nguyen came in with a chart and quiet eyes, explaining that this was just the beginning. Additional procedures would be necessary. One surgery, then another, then a long course of treatment. We'll do everything we can, the doctor said, gently, but I need you to be ready for a marathon, not a sprint. Malik nodded, jaw set, his mind already doing the math that would never add up. His phone buzzed as Dr. Nguyen walked out. It was his warehouse supervisor. He stepped into the hallway to take it, heart already sinking. Malik, I've got to be straight with you, the voice on the other end said, curt but not cruel. You missed 2 shifts. That's job abandonment. You know the policy. I'm sorry, man, but we had to let you go. No exceptions. Malik didn't argue, didn't ask for a favor or raise his voice. He simply said, I understand, and hung up. Then he slipped the phone back into his pocket and walked silently back into Ava's room. She she was still sleeping, unaware of the new loss added to her father's already crumbling foundation. By early afternoon, the hospital's social worker handed Malik a list of job centers and local services. He took it with quiet thanks, tucked it into his jacket, and set off through the rain. With no car, he walked a long stretch from the hospital to the job. Centara 15-block trek with soaked shoes and a thin hoodie that did nothing to keep the water out. Inside, the place was packed, noisy, fluorescent lit and sterile. Malik filled out forms, answered questions without emotion, and was told politely to check back in a few days. No guarantees, no quick solutions. By the time he left, the rain had turned heavy. Cold rivulets slid down the back of his neck as he trudged back through the grey, his breath fogging in the air. His thoughts were a knot of anxiety variant. Food, medication, and he barely noticed the silver car idling by the curb ahead of him until the passenger window rolled down. A woman leaned across the seat, her voice cutting through the rain. "Malik Carter." He stopped, blinking through the downpour. "Yeah, I'm Danielle Brooks," she said, stepping out of the car with an umbrella. "I bought your sedan yesterday." His heart sank. A little. He wasn't in the mood for small talk, and he certainly didn't want to think about that car again. "Okay," he said, cautiously. "Something wrong with it?" "No," she said, pausing. "It's not just a car, is it?" Malik stiffened, unsure what this was about. "Look, I sold it. It's yours." She held out the keys. "I want you to have it back." He stared at her, unmoving. "I can't. I sold it. That's the deal." Danielle stepped closer, her voice low but insistent. "I didn't buy it for the car." He frowned. "What does that mean?" She didn't answer right away, just looked at him with a quiet intensity, like she was searching for something she hadn't quite found yet. Then she placed the keys in his hand and closed his fingers around them. "Call it a gift," she said, "or call it a loan. Doesn't matter. Just take care of your daughter." Before he could say another word, she got back into the silver car and pulled away, tires splashing through the wet street. Malik stood there, soaked to the bone, keys clenched in his hand, stunned. The old metal felt familiar, solid, warm even through the chill. He turned slowly, the rain still coming, down in sheets, and stared after the taillights as they vanished into the storm. For the first time in days, he didn't feel like he was falling. He didn't know who she was, or why she'd done it, but something had shifted. And now, for the first time in a long time, Malik had more than just loss in his hands. He had a question, maybe even a chance. The hospital lights burned through the night like unblinking eyes, always watching, always reminding Malik how fragile everything had become. He was back at Ava's side, their world once again reduced to IVs, whispered updates, and mounting costs. The deposit had only bought them time. Now there were new bills, more scans, a specialized medication that insurance only partially covered, and the promise of another procedure in a few weeks. Every figure printed in red ink might as well have been blood. Malik listened to the billing clerk recite numbers as if she were reading a weatherforecast.com, and detached. He nodded along, but in his head he was already figuring out what he could pawn next, how many more hours he could stretch in a day. The car Danielle had returned became his lifeline. He registered for rideshare apps that night, and within hours he was driving nights, weekends, every free second that didn't belong to Ava or the hospital. The hours blurred together, the echo of tires on wet pavement, the disjointed conversations with strangers in the back seat, the constant navigation ping in his ear. He was polite, reliable, quiet. His rating climbed, but so did his fatigue. The money came in slowly, never enough to stay ahead of the bills, just enough to keep them from drowning. Ava started noticing. "Can you sleep at home tonight?" she asked one evening as he tucked the blanket under her chin. Her voice was small, more hopeful than accusing. Malik smiled softly. brushing her curls from her forehead. "I'm working on a surprise," he said, voice steady. She beamed, eyes lighting up with the kind of belief that made his lie cut a little deeper. Then she drifted to sleep, clutching her sketchbook like a security blanket. That night, somewhere, near the end of his shift, Malik sat alone at a red light on the edge of the city. The streets were empty. A soft drizzle clung to the windshield, caught in the glow of the traffic signal. He gripped the steering wheel hard, his breath ragged. It was all too much, the sleeplessness, the bills, the helplessness. His chest ached, not from pain but from pressure, like his ribs were closing in. For a moment, his head dropped against the wheel, the car silent except for the soft tick of the blinker. He didn't cry, not quite, but something cracked, a tremble in his jaw, a tear that fell and vanished into the fabric of his sleeve. He wiped his face, forced his shoulders back, and kept driving. A few days later, Danielle appeared again, not in a car this time, but in the hospital hallway, holding a tray with 2 cups of coffee. Malik spotted her just as she passed the nurse's station. She didn't look surprised to see him, only quietly resolute. Ava was the one who lit up. "That's the lady who brought you coffee that night," she said, pointing with a finger that still had an IV taped to it. Malik blinked. He remembered the cup now, sitting on the windowsill the night after the surgery. He hadn't known who left it. Danielle smiled gently at Ava and waved before turning her attention back to Malik. They spoke in a quiet alcove just off the pediatric ward. Danielle didn't press, didn't pry. She simply stood with him like someone who knew the shape of pain intimately. Eventually, she spoke. "My son, Elijah, died 2 years ago. Same floor, different room." Her voice was steady, but not without sorrow. "Congenital liver disorder. We fought like hell. I sold my house, emptied my retirement, still lost him." Malik looked away, unsure what to say. She continued, softer now. "After that, I started a fund. Quiet thing, no website. Just parents helping parents, those on the edge. When I bought your car, I saw something familiar. Not just the way you handed over the keys without looking back. The weight, the desperation hiding behind your eyes. I've been there." He shook his head. "I'm not a case study. I'm not looking for charity." "It's not charity," she said. "It's survival. And you're already in a fight you can't win alone." Malik's voice was rough. "I can't owe anyone." Danielle stepped closer, her expression gentle but firm. "I'm not here to save you. I'm here because someone once saved me." They stood in silence for a long moment. Malik looked down at the hospital bracelet still clinging to his wrist, the calluses on his hands, the keys to the car that shouldn't be his, and the memory of his daughter asking him to come home. Pride and pain tangled in his throat like wires. He didn't say yes, but he didn't walk away either. Danielle didn't push further. She simply nodded, passed him one of the coffees, and said, "Think about it," before walking back down the hallway. Malik remained still, warm cup in hand, the bitter scent curling around him like a question. He wasn't ready to accept help, not yet. But for the first time, he wasn't standing entirely alone. The hospital corridors seemed quieter. That day, as if even the walls were holding their breath. Ava had been doing better color in her cheeks. Jokes whispered between yawns, but then, without warning, her heart rate spiked. Machines shrilled, nurses rushed in, and Malik was ushered out of the room before he could even process what was happening. Hours later, Dr. Nguyen delivered the news. There was a complication, a setback. Another surgery was needed immediately. There was no time to wait for approvals or paperwork, and worse, no remaining financial cushion. The medication alone had drained Malik's last reserves. Insurance wouldn't cover the new procedure. Dr. Nguyen's tone was gentle but firm. "We'll do what we can, but without a deposit, we're limited." "I'm sorry." Malik tried everything. He called banks, applied for emergency loans, begged for extensions. Each application came back denied. Friends he hadn't spoken to in years left his calls unanswered. He even considered selling the car again, but with time so short, no one would offer enough. By dusk, Malik sat slumped in a hospital chair, numb. His daughter was behind that glass wall, fighting for her life, and he had nothing left to give. Pride, desperation, and despair tangled until there was only silence inside him. Quietly, with a hand that barely worked, he signed the discharge papers. "I can't afford to keep her here," he whispered to the clerk. His voice was hollow. He didn't look back as he walked toward the parking lot. The rain had returned, light this time, almost a mist. He slid into the driver's seat, closed the door, and leaned back, eyes shut. Then he saw the envelope. It had been placed on the passenger seat, no stamp, no name, just a check inside and a yellow post-it stuck to it, in simple handwriting. "You saved her once. Let someone else help this time, D." The amount was exact. Enough for the surgery, the medication, and the immediate care. For a moment, Malik couldn't breathe. His hands trembled as he stared at the check. Rain, tapping softly against the windshield. No hesitation this time. He threw the car into gear and raced back to the hospital. Dr. Nguyen met him at the front desk, surprised to see him again. "We were about to transfer her," he said. Malik held out the check without a word. The doctor looked it over, then nodded once and disappeared down the hallway. The surgery was delayed but not cancelled. Ava would get what she needed. While Ava was in the operating room, Malik sat in the waiting area, the envelope still clutched in his lap. Danielle hadn't called, hadn't left a number. She'd simply acted. Hours later, he learned the cost. Word came through a quiet conversation at the nurse's station, low voices, sideways glances. Danielle had used funds from her non-profit foundation to pay Ava's bill, but she hadn't gone through the board. No vote, no discussion, just a wire transfer and a signature. Now the foundation was in turmoil. Board members were furious. She'd violated protocol, put the organization's financial structure at risk. Legal repercussions loomed. She was reprimanded in a closed-door meeting and faced removal from her leadership role. When questioned, she didn't apologize. She looked him squarely in the eye and said, "If saving one child costs me a board seat, so be it." Malik didn't hear it from her directly. He found out in fragments, whispers from nurses, a brief mention in a hospital newsletter. When he finally saw Danielle again, days later, she stood outside Ava's room, watching through the glass as the little girl drew a crayon picture of a woman with a coffee cup in one hand and a cape on her back. Malik stepped beside her, unsure of what to say. Danielle smiled softly, the kind that carried more weight than words. "Looks like I made it into one of her comics." "You didn't have to do that," Malik said. His voice cracked not from shame, but from something deeper. Gratitude, guilt, awe. She looked at him, eyes tired but kind. "No, but I needed to. I needed to believe that helping one child still mattered." Malik didn't argue this time. He didn't push the money back. He just nodded, swallowing hard, the ache in his chest no longer just fear. For the first time, it was something else, something closer to hope. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of life slowly began to return, not the old life Malik had once known, but something quieter, steadier. Ava's cheeks were full of color again, her laugh echoing through the hospital corridors like a song long forgotten. The surgery had worked. Recovery was slow but steady, and Malik never left her side. He slept in the chair, answered emails, in the hallway, and slowly, carefully, started picking up remote work. A former colleague from his architecture days had reached out after seeing one of Malik's posts in a forgotten LinkedIn thread, still looking for design work. It wasn't a full-time job, but it was something. CAD files to revise, technical, layouts to clean up. The hours were flexible. The pay was decent. More importantly, It gave Malik a piece of himself back, proof that he was still more than just surviving. One afternoon, as the late spring sun poured gently through the windows of Ava's room, Danielle appeared again. She stood at the door, holding a small paper bag of snacks and a folder tucked under her arm. Malik looked up from his laptop and smiled. Ava squealed with delight and waved from her bed, a new drawing in progress balanced on her lap. This time, Danielle stayed. They shared coffee again, not in crisis, but in calm, two people who had walked through fire and come out the other side, still standing. Eventually, Danielle opened the folder and slid it toward him. Inside were drafts for a new initiative, a complete redesign of her foundation's grant process. "We've relied too much on assumptions," she said. "Board members who haven't set foot in an ER in years making decisions about emergency aid. I want to bring in real voices, parents who've lived it. I want you to consult." Malik stared at the folder for a long moment before he spoke. "Why me?" "Because you know what it's like to choose between pride and survival," Danielle said quietly. "Because I trust you to speak for the people who don't get invited to meetings like this." He didn't say yes out of guilt. He wasn't trying to repay a debt or ease his conscience. He said yes because something inside him had shifted for the first time in years. He wasn't just trying to stay afloat. He was thinking about how to reach back, how to build something better for others like him. They started slowly: mails, Zoom calls, notes passed during hospital visits. Malik gave feedback on grant applications, spoke candidly about the humiliations and obstacles no brochure ever mentioned. Danielle listened. The foundation changed. Their relationship grew, not romantic, but built on something just as rare: mutual respect. They were two survivors, bonded not by tragedy alone, but by the way they chose to move through it. Danielle had lost her son. Malik had nearly lost his daughter. Both had refused to let that loss become the end of their story. They spoke often, now not just about the foundation, but about everything in between: music, parenting, the strange, quiet grief of surviving something that should have broken you. One day, Ava presented them with a drawing. It showed Malik and Danielle, shoulder to shoulder, standing tall with Ava between them. Malik wore a cape, his tool belt loaded with pencils and sketchpads. Danielle held a steaming cup of coffee in one hand and a sword made of sunlight in the other. Above them loomed a cartoonish monster labeled the Bills. The three of them were mid-battle, fierce and smiling. Malik laughed, shaking his head, but Danielle only said, "I like my sword." In that moment, something clicked. They weren't just fighting monsters, they were becoming the people they needed when things were darkest. And now, they were building something brighter, one drawing, one grant, one hard-earned truth at a time. The morning was still, the kind that carried the faint chill of early light but promised warmth later. Malik walked hand in hand with Ava, her backpack bouncing with every eager step. The city was just beginning to stir muffled traffic in the distance. A dog barking 2 blocks over, birds announcing a new day. At the school gate, Ava squeezed his hand once before breaking into a run, her laughter trailing behind her like wind chimes. She turned back briefly, waving with both arms, then disappeared through the doors. Swallowed by the joyful chaos of morning, drop-off, Malik stood there for a moment, unmoving. He breathed in deep, letting the quiet wrap around him. Across the street, parked neatly where it had been returned weeks ago, sat the old sedan, the familiar navy blue paint, dulled by time but still holding steady, still his. He crossed over slowly, reached out, and ran a hand across the hood. The metal was cool beneath his fingers, the engine silent but full of memory. His father's hands had once touched that same surface, so had his. Now, Ava's laughter echoed. Just beyond the trees, Malik closed his eyes, letting it all settle: the long nights, the battles won, the moments he thought he wouldn't survive. And somehow, Standing there, he felt the weight begin to shift. Not vanish, but change. He looked up at the sky, then down the street where the world moved on without fanfare. Sometimes, he said softly, voice barely above a whisper, the people who save us aren't the ones we expect. They just show up, and they stay. He stood there for a while longer, then opened the car door. Not because he needed to go anywhere, but because, finally, he could.